You know the clip. November 20th, 1995, Kensington Palace. A woman in a dark suit, kohl-rimmed eyes, sitting very still across from a BBC reporter, telling nearly 23 million people there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Britain and then the world decided that was the moment. The caged princess finally speaks. The shy girl finds her voice. 50 years of royal silence broken by one composed woman with nothing left to lose. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a sequel. She had already told this exact story 3 years earlier through a biographer from inside the same palace in total secrecy, and then watched her own household deny it to the world while she said nothing. The interview everyone remembers as her one spontaneous act of honesty was actually the second installment of a media campaign she had been quietly running since the marriage first cracked. And the woman the tabloids spent a decade calling shy, fragile, painfully unequipped for public life, turned out to be the most disciplined narrative operator the House of Windsor produced in a generation. Here is what the fairy tale version leaves out. Before there was a fairy tale, there was a sister he dated first. Before the wedding, there was a mistress he never gave up. Before the divorce, there were secret tapes recorded on a hidden machine in a palace bedroom. Before the funeral, there was a brother who stood up in Westminster Abbey and all but accused his own family of hunting her to death. And underneath all of it, there was a 19-year-old who had already lived through exactly this story once, as a child, and walked into it again anyway. It all started on a grouse shoot. Autumn 1977. Althorpe, the Spencer family seat in Northamptonshire, a few hours north of London. Charles, Prince of Wales, 29 years old, comes to shoot with the Spencer family. He is dating the eldest daughter, Sarah. 16-year-old Diana, the third daughter, gets introduced to him in a muddy field, not as a prospect, but as her sister's little sister, the one who still had braces and baby fat and a habit of turning up wherever the interesting people were. Sarah would later take credit for the whole arrangement, joking for years afterward, "I introduced them. I'm Cupid." She had no idea what she was actually setting in motion, and neither, really, did anyone else in that field. Before you can understand why a 19-year-old kindergarten aide would say yes to a 32-year-old future king she had met maybe a dozen times, you have to understand what she was trying to leave. And it is an almost exact mirror of what she was about to marry into. The Spencers were not new money trying to buy proximity to the crown. They were generations deep in it. Diana's grandmothers on both sides had served as ladies in waiting to the Queen Mother. The family seat before Althorpe, Park House, sat directly on the grounds of Sandringham, close enough that Diana grew up playing with Prince Andrew and Prince Edward as children. Rank was never the problem in that family. The house was. When Diana was 6 years old, her parents' marriage came apart in public and ugly fashion. Her mother, Frances, left for another man, Peter Shand Kyde. Her father, Johnny, fought for custody of the children and won. And here is the detail that biographers keep coming back to because it is almost too sharp to be useful as anything but foreshadowing. Diana's own maternal grandmother, Lady Fermoy, took the witness stand in that custody case and testified against her own daughter, helping hand the children to their father. A grandmother, under oath, choosing the institution's version of a proper family over her own child. Diana watched that happen, or at least grew up in the wreckage of it, at 6 years old. She and her younger brother Charles were raised largely by nannies after that. She saw her mother on weekends and school holidays. When her father remarried in 1976 to a woman named Rain, Countess of Dartmouth, Diana despised her on contact and spent the rest of her life calling her privately, acid rain. She was 16, motherless in the house she'd grown up in, mother-in-law by a stranger her father had installed in her place, and already, according to friends interviewed by multiple biographers, showing the earliest signs of the eating disorder that would later be formally diagnosed as bulimia nervosa. Sit with the 2 lessons a 6-year-old in that house would have absorbed, because they explain the next 20 years better than anything that happened after the wedding. Marriages end, and badly. And the people whose job is to protect you will, under enough pressure, choose the institution's version of events over yours. Every major decision Diana would later make, the secret tapes, the panorama sit-down, all of it runs on those 2 lessons. There's a detail from her school years that fits the pattern almost too neatly. Friends at Riddlesworth Hall and later West Heath recalled a girl who was unremarkable academically, failed her O-levels twice, and left formal education at 16 with no qualifications at all. But who was, without exception, the one other girls went to when something at home had gone wrong. She organised, she soothed, she kept other people's secrets without apparent effort. Take the retrospective flattery of that with the same caution any late recollection deserves. The way you'd caution a Kennedy biographer quoting an unnamed schoolmate decades on. But it fits everything that came after. The same girl who couldn't pass a written exam turned out to have an almost frightening aptitude for reading a room and managing what it saw. So when a prince started dropping by, what she was being offered didn't read, to her, as obviously romantic. It read more like an escape route with a crown sewn onto it. A house that couldn't be broken up by a custody judge. A family too grand for anyone to leave. Charles, for his part, was choosing carefully, and the record here is not flattering to the fairy tale at all. He had already met the woman he actually loved 7 years earlier. Camilla Shand was introduced to him in 1970 by a mutual friend while he was serving in the Royal Navy. According to his own biographer, he was immediately taken with her. While Charles was away at sea, Camilla married a cavalry officer named Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. A marriage some accounts describe as having been publicly announced before he'd formally proposed, which devastated Charles at the time. He wrote in a letter that it seemed particularly cruel that fate had ended what he called a blissful, peaceful relationship. They stayed close friends through her marriage, and by most biographical accounts, they resumed a physical relationship around 1978 or 1979. Which means that for at least 2 to 3 years before he ever proposed to Diana, and quite possibly overlapping with the courtship itself, Charles was carrying on with a married woman while publicly auditioning teenagers for the role of his wife. Camilla and her husband were, according to multiple royal correspondents, present at several of the country house weekends where Charles and Diana's courtship actually took place. Sandringham, Balmoral, Windsor, coincidence or cover? Historians still argue the point. What isn't in dispute is the job description Charles was filling. He needed a virgin, an aristocrat, a Protestant, camera-ready and young enough that the tabloids would print the age gap as romantic rather than alarming. Diana was 19, he was 32. When a television reporter asked them on the day the engagement was announced whether they were in love, Diana blushed and said, "Of course." Charles, unprompted, added, "Whatever love means." That line gets replayed now as obvious foreshadowing. At the time, almost nobody in the press flinched. The night before the wedding is where the marriage previewed itself with almost cruel precision, the same way a demolition derby reception previews a mismatched merger. According to biographer Sally Bedell-Smith, Charles cried the night before his own wedding, reportedly still torn over Camilla. And separately, Diana had already confronted him before they'd even reached the altar about a gift Camilla had given him, a pair of cufflinks engraved with their private nicknames for each other that Diana had discovered him planning to wear on the honeymoon. She has said she tried to back out of the wedding more than once in the weeks before, and that it was her own father who talked her into going through with it, on the theory that things would settle once they were married and Camilla receded. Camilla did not recede. She attended the wedding. Some accounts describe her outfit, a pale grey dress and pillbox hat close enough to bridal white that guests noticed and talked about it for years. They married on July 29, 1981 at St. Paul's Cathedral in front of 3,500 guests inside and roughly 750 million television viewers worldwide, the most watched live event in human history to that point. Diana, reciting her vows, said his name in the wrong order, calling him Philip Charles instead of Charles Philip. Charles, for his part, fumbled his own line, promising her thy goods instead of my worldly goods. Small errors, forgotten by most of the crowd by the reception. In hindsight, biographers and tabloids alike have treated them as the day quietly telling everyone what it already knew. Watch how fast the actual marriage revealed itself once the cameras stopped rolling. The honeymoon was a Mediterranean cruise aboard the royal yacht Britannia, followed by a stretch at Balmoral. Within those first weeks, Diana has said, a diary or notebook of Charles's fell open to reveal photographs of Camilla. Whatever the exact mechanism, by her own later account, the marriage's central wound was open and bleeding before they'd even returned to England. She began making herself sick not long after, a pattern that would later be diagnosed as bulimia nervosa. And by her own telling to Andrew Morton, she attempted self-harm on multiple occasions during those early years. Incidents the palace never acknowledged publicly and the press, at the time, never printed. This is the part most tellings skip past to get to the divorce, so slow down here. For the better part of a decade, the most photographed woman on earth was quietly disintegrating inside a several hundred-room bureaucracy that had no department, no protocol, and by most accounts, no genuine will to address that kind of collapse. She produced 2 heirs on schedule. Prince William in June 1982, roughly 11 months after the wedding. Prince Harry in September 1984. Friends and biographers have since described a period of postnatal depression after William's birth that went essentially untreated inside a household organised around engagements and appearances. Because the one job description everyone in that family agreed she'd fulfilled was the heir. She smiled at functions she had reportedly cried before leaving for. She became, without any formal training, one of the most gifted public performers the monarchy had produced in generations. And for years, nobody with any institutional power seemed to notice or particularly care that the performance was covering a structural collapse. Here's the asymmetry that defines this marriage more than any single affair does. Charles had an entire existing relationship to retreat into whenever the marriage got difficult. Diana had nothing but the role itself, and the role, as designed by the institution, was never meant to be permanent in the way she needed it to be. Produce the heirs. Recede into ribbon cuttings and needlework. She would not recede. That refusal is the whole second half of this story. By 1986, according to Charles's own authorized biography, he resumed the relationship with Camilla in earnest. Diana, by multiple accounts, had by then started seeking connection outside the marriage as well. Most documented among several relationships, an affair with a cavalry officer named James Hewitt that began around the same period. Both sides have since confirmed some version of their own conduct. Neither side has ever agreed, publicly, on who broke the marriage first, and any honest telling of this story has to admit the timeline genuinely supports either version, depending which spouse's account you weight more heavily. What the press eventually got its hands on was worse than either affair on its own. It was the sound of both of them happening. In 1989 and 1990, private mobile phone calls involving both royals were intercepted, almost certainly by radio scanner hobbyists rather than any formal operation. Though conspiracy theories about intelligence involvement persist to this day without solid evidence. One set of recordings, published in 1992 and nicknamed Squidgygate by the tabloids, captured Diana in an intimate late-night conversation with a friend named James Gilby, who called her Squidgy throughout. A second recording from 1989 captured an unmistakably intimate call between Charles and Camilla, in which he reportedly told her he wanted to live inside her trousers and joked about being reincarnated as a tampon. The tabloids christened it Camillagate. Both recordings turned what had been rumour into something closer to transcript, and both, notably, leaked to the public well before either royal had admitted anything on the record. Then came the correction that mattered more than either leak. In 1992, a royal reporter named Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story, a biography that laid out her bulimia, her suicide attempts, and Charles's relationship with Camilla in devastating, specific detail. Buckingham Palace denied any cooperation with the book. Diana herself, to friends and even to Charles, denied having any hand in it. For 5 years, the official record stood that Morton had assembled the book from second-hand gossip and disgruntled staff. That was a lie. And Diana knew it was a lie, because she was the book's primary source. She had recorded hours of material in secret, passing the tapes to a friend, Dr. James Colthurst, who smuggled them out of Kensington Palace to Morton, and she let the resulting firestorm consume her own marriage in public, while allowing everyone around her, including her husband, to believe the account had come from somewhere else. She did not correct the record until after her death, when Morton finally revealed the tape's existence. Read that twice. The single most consequential act of her adult public life she carried out entirely from the shadows and let the world assume it was someone else's doing. Within months of the book's publication, the marriage's collapse became a matter of state. On December 9, 1992, Prime Minister John Major stood up in the House of Commons and formally announced the separation of the Prince and Princess of Wales, reading a statement that specified carefully that the decision carried no constitutional implications for Diana's children's future accession. A country's elected head of government addressing its national legislature about the state of a single marriage. That is how far the institution had let this go before admitting anything publicly. The Queen would later call 1992 her annus horribilis, a phrase that made headlines for weeks, and the marriage breakdown was only one entry on the list. Windsor Castle caught fire that same November. 2 other royal marriages, the Duke and Duchess of York and Princess Anne, were also unravelling in public on roughly the same timeline. What that context tells you is important, so don't skip it. The Wales' marriage did not collapse in isolation. It collapsed as part of a broader institutional crisis about whether the monarchy could survive being looked at this closely at all. Diana and Charles were not just failing each other. They were the most visible casualty of a family discovering, in real time, that the 20th century's cameras were not going to treat royalty the way the 19th century's portraitists had. Every leak after that point, and there were dozens, competing off the record briefings from what the tabloids nicknamed Camp Charles and Camp Diana, should be read against that backdrop. Both sides were fighting a media war because by 1992, a media war was the only kind of war left available to either of them. The middle of the decade delivered the two moments each side would use to tell their own version of the story for the rest of their lives. In June 1994, Charles gave a television interview to Jonathan Dimbleby in which, asked directly whether he had been unfaithful, he answered that he had, until it became clear that the marriage had irretrievably broken down, us both having tried. He did not name Camilla on camera. He did not need to. Then, in November 1995, came the interview everyone remembers as Diana's liberation. The Panorama sit-down, watched by roughly 23 million people in Britain alone, is now known to have been secured partly through deception. Reporter Martin Bashir showed Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, forged bank documents suggesting palace staff were being paid to spy on her. Manipulation that a later BBC commissioned inquiry confirmed in full and formally apologised for. That context is real, and it should not be minimised. A journalist lied his way into that princess's confidence. But it should also not be allowed to erase the other half of the truth, which is that Diana chose to sit down, chose every answer she gave, and delivered the line, "There were three of us in this marriage," so it was a bit crowded with the precision of a woman who had already spent 3 years quietly watching what a single well-placed sentence, leaked at the right moment, could do to that family. She also told Bashir she did not believe she would ever be crowned queen, adding that she would rather be a queen of people's hearts. She had been manipulated into the chair. Nobody manipulated what came out of her once she was sitting in it. The Queen wrote to both Charles and Diana within weeks of the broadcast, urging an early divorce. It was finalised in August 1996. The settlement reportedly included a lump sum in the range of £17 million, a private office and staff, and continued use of apartments at Kensington Palace. What Diana lost was the style Her Royal Highness. What she kept, and what no lawyer's settlement could touch, was the public's loyalty, built over a decade of learning, the hard way, that the institution would always protect its own version of events over her well-being. By the time she was legally free of it, she had become considerably better at narrative than the institution she'd married into. She spent her last year doing, in public and without a script, the thing the palace had never quite let her do inside the marriage. In January 1997, she walked through an active minefield in Angola in a visor and flak jacket to campaign against landmines, a single afternoon that helped drive an international treaty banning them later that same year. A decade earlier, in April 1987, she had held the bare hand of a man dying of AIDS at a London hospital without gloves in front of photographers at a moment when a meaningful share of the British public still believed the disease could spread through touch. That one photograph is credited by public health historians with doing more to destigmatise HIV in Britain than years of government campaigns had managed. The instinct behind both moments, a precise sense of an audience and exactly what to do in front of it, is the same instinct her marriage had spent a decade trying to sand down into department-approved smiles at ribbon cuttings. On August 31st, 1997, Diana died in a car crash in a Paris underpass, along with her partner Dodi Fayed and their driver, while the car was being pursued by photographers on motorcycles. She was 36. A French judicial investigation and later a British inquest both concluded the crash resulted from a combination of excessive speed and the driver's blood alcohol level, and found no evidence of the conspiracy theories involving the intelligence services or the royal family directly that circulated for years afterward. That finding hasn't stopped those theories from persisting in corners of the public imagination to this day, But the official record on the cause of the crash itself is not actually in serious dispute among investigators who examined it. Then the institution she had spent a decade learning to out-narrate did what institutions do, and for the first time in living memory, it failed completely, in public, within days. The palace's instinct for restraint collided with a national grief so large and so unfamiliar that the Queen was pressured into an unprecedented live televised address, breaking with a lifetime of protocol about what the monarchy shows and when. Crowds outside the palace gates left an ocean of flowers that took weeks to clear. At the funeral in Westminster Abbey, Diana's younger brother, Earl Spencer, delivered a eulogy that amounted to a direct rebuke of the family his sister had married into, promising her sons would be protected from what he called the same forces that had, in his telling, hunted her. Mourners gathered outside the Abbey's open doors were recorded applauding, audibly, mid-service, an act unheard of at a royal funeral, and one the family inside could do nothing about. There is a coda to this that the fairy tale version never mentions, because it complicates who the villain of the story is supposed to be. A quarter century later, Diana's younger son, Harry, published his own memoir, Spare, and had earlier been linked, at arm's length and then denied it, to a biography called Finding Freedom, an almost exact structural echo of his mother's arrangement with Andrew Morton 30 years before. Publicly deny involvement, privately shape the record. Let the book take the blame for saying what you weren't yet willing to say yourself. Whatever else divides that family, the specific tactic of managing your own story from the shadows while denying you're doing it did not die with Diana. It appears to be inherited. So look at that panorama clip again. A composed woman in a dark suit, calmly detonating a marriage in front of 23 million people, and by extension, in front of the institution that had spent 16 years insisting the marriage was fine. For 30 years, that clip has been read as the moment the shy girl finally found her voice. But follow what that voice had already been doing for nearly a decade before those cameras ever arrived. It had recorded secret tapes in a palace bedroom and let a biographer absorb the blame for what came out of them. It had walked into a minefield and taken its gloves off for a dying stranger, on camera, on purpose, understanding exactly what the resulting photograph would do to public opinion. It had learned, inside a family that treated image management as a form of statecraft, to beat that family at its own specialty, and to do it while the tabloids that made her famous kept calling her fragile the entire time. Charles got the throne, eventually, and the wife he'd wanted from the start, and 30 years to make his own peace with how the public would remember 1981. Diana got the one asset the palace could never issue, formally revoke, or write into a settlement, the public's version of the story. She had spent her entire childhood watching institutions, a courtroom, a grandmother, a father's new wife, decide whose account of a broken family got to count as the truth. She married into the largest institution in the country, built for exactly that purpose, and by the end, she was the one deciding whose account counted. The girl from the muddy field learned one skill before she learned anything else: how to let someone else take the blame for the truth you weren't ready to say out loud yet. She married into a family that had been managing its own myths for 1,000 years, and in the end, for one brief, devastating decade, she outperformed it at its own specialty.